All right, let's talk neck shaping in the Pemberton pullover. I've completed my back here. Just move it here for a second. I've completed my back. You can see the armhole shaping here. And I'm now up at the point where I've reached the number of inches in the armhole measurement. So when you're measuring your armhole, you're measuring from this flat piece here. I just kind of come over and then put my measuring tape and measure from here up to find the armhole measurement. Once you've got the required number of stitches, following the pattern, there's a few rows of border that happens in here, and then the neck shaping starts. So you begin on the right side. I have the right side facing, and you're going to knit the number of stitches required for your pattern, and then join in a new ball of yarn. So that's what I'm going to do here. Just let me get my yarn organized here. Okay, so I need, for my size, I need to knit 22 stitches. So I'm going to do that first. All right, so I've got 18 stitches so far. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and I have 22 stitches that I'm required to knit for my neck size. So I'm going to knit 20 of them, and then after I've done 22, I'm going to join my second ball of yarn. So I'm actually going to do that now because one way that I can do that is just to knit the last 2 stitches double-stranded, and that will anchor my new piece of yarn for me while I work the last 2 stitches of my row. So I've got 20 stitches here. I need 22 stitches. I'm going to knit with the 2 strands held together, and I'm going to hold that other piece of yarn, the tail from my new piece of yarn. I'm going to put it over here and hold my 2, and put those 2 balls together over here and hold those 2 strands together. It doesn't really matter how you hold the yarn. Just check once you've made your first double-stranded stitch that both the long ends of the yarn are attached to balls. And here's stitch number 22. Okay, now I just have to remember that these last 2 stitches here are double-stranded, and when I go to knit or purl them next time around, I will make sure to get both of those paired stitches so that I don't accidentally knit them as 2 stitches each. I'm going to make sure that I knit both those wraps together. And now I just find the tail from my new ball. It's joined in, it's ready to go. Okay, it's just wound around my other ball here, so we tuck all of that out of the way. Okay, so with the new ball of yarn, you're going to bind off a number of stitches for the center of the back of your neck. So in my case, that's 30 stitches. Now, one thing you can do here is you can count off 30 stitches. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. And you can put a stitch marker in there. Now, I'm going to show you a little trick here. I've counted off 30 stitches, so I want to bind them off. But when you're binding off, you're always pushing one stitch over the other. So I'm actually going to count off 31 stitches because when I get to my marker, I will still have 1 stitch left on my needle. Let me show you. So making sure that I'm using the yarn that's attached to my new ball of yarn, I'm going to bind off 30 stitches. Now you know that this happens by knitting 2 stitches and passing the earlier one that was knit over top of the second one. I have another method that I like to use, and so I'm going to bind off in that way. It kind of combines all those movements in one. So I'm going to slip this stitch back onto this needle and do a modified conventional bind off. You don't have to do this. It's completely optional. You can just keep knitting another stitch. Let me do that again. Knit another stitch and pass the first one over the last one that was just knit. Then you knit another stitch and pass the first one over the second one. I have a method for binding off that's called Lucy Neat Bees Modified Conventional Bind Off, and that's a complicated term. You can look it up and see the DVD or the video on it. But basically you pass the stitch back that you've just knit or bound off, and you insert your needle into that stitch and then grab the next one and pull your yarn through the little cross that goes between the two stitches. Lucy Neat Bee explains this much better, and I will post a link to her video explaining how to do this. But essentially, we're binding off. I just like the fluidity of the movement, and I like that this bind off isn't too tight. And when you get quite practiced at it, you can do it fairly quickly. So those are all the reasons why I like Lucy Neat Bee's Modified Conventional Bind Off. So I'm going to keep binding off until I get to my marker. Okay, so you can see that my marker is approaching on the left-hand side here. And so this is my 30th stitch, but in order to bind it off, I need to pass it over the 31st stitch. So I'm just going to knit the 31st stitch and pass the 30th stitch over the 31st stitch, and then that stitch is bound off. And that's why I put my marker one stitch beyond the 30th stitch, because it's still left here. So now I can take my marker off and then knit the remaining stitches. So there should be 22 stitches left here. So I'll count as I go. 21 and 22. So I now have the same number of stitches for each side of the neck and a number of stitches bound off in the center for the back of the neck. And now I'm going to complete each of these two sides separately because they each have their own ball of yarn attached to them. Okay, so that makes it really simple because I don't have to. Some patterns will have you knit one side and then join your ball of yarn and knit the other side. But this way we can do both of the sides at the same time and not have to get confused about increases and decreases. So the next row says working each side separately with the attached yarn knit. So you're just going to turn your work around, and using the yarn that's attached to the ball, I will knit back across this row. And I know it's kind of strange to knit on the wrong side, but the row does have the wrong side indicator on it, so that's good. So once I knit across one shoulder, I'm just going to move to the next one. Okay, so I've knit across one shoulder. I'll push my stitches up, and using the other ball of yarn, I will knit across the second shoulder. Remember that where I joined in my new yarn here, I have a couple of double strands here. So I'm just going to make sure to knit under both of those double strands and carry on. Okay, when I get to the end of that row, I'm going to turn my work around. I know, you got to keep these balls of yarn. There's a bit of yarn management that happens here, but it's okay because it just means that there's less thinking about the second shoulder. So now that I've completed one right side row, bound off in the middle here, finished that right side row, attaching my second ball of yarn, and I've knit back across both of the wrong side rows. So the next instruction is working a decrease row. So this is to do neck shaping. So along here, we're going to build these shoulder pieces. There'll be a shoulder here. This is actually my right shoulder and this is my left shoulder. Because when I put it on, this is the back, so this will be my right side and this will be my left side. We're going to build up the shoulder a little bit to create some room for the neckline, but we're also going to make this neckline a little bit wider, so it'll have some edges that go out like this. And so to do that, we're going to do some decreasing on the neck edge side on both sides of the neck. So we'll do some decreasing here and some decreasing here to create this nice edging on the neck for the back. As you're working across this, we want to do the decreases next to the neck edge. So the instructions are to knit to 3 stitches before the neck edge, knit 2 together and knit 1, and then on the next shoulder you're going to knit 1, SSK, and knit to the end. 1 stitch decreased at either neck side. So let's just do that. Alright, so I'm going to knit to the last 3 stitches on this side of the shoulder. And when I get to 3 stitches, I'll knit 2 together and then knit 1. Then I'll move over to the other shoulder, drop that yarn that's attached to this shoulder and work with the yarn that's here. And the instructions here are to knit 1 and do that SSK decrease. Remember, the SSK is to slip 1 stitch, to slip the next 2 stitches one at a time. So there's 1, there's 2, and then insert the tip of your left hand needle into the front of the 2 slipped stitches and knit them together. Okay, and then knit to the end of the row. There's always 1 stitch along the edge because again that's your selvage stitch. So we have 1 stitch here and 1 stitch here. The decrease is 1 stitch in from the edge to give us that selvage edge to pick up on later. Okay, when you get to the end of this row, you're going to work your way back. And again, just going to turn your work and work with the yarn that's attached to the side that you're working on. You're going to repeat the last 2 rows. So we're going to repeat the knit side row with the decreases and another purl side row, and then continue on until your neck. Continue on until the armhole measures a particular length. Okay, so just keep working back and forth. Measuring your armhole until you get to the length that's indicated in your pattern size, and then you can put your stitches on a holder as the instructions state. So I'm just going to do those decreases one more time, and then I'll let you go on your way to complete the shoulders. Okay, here I am again with the right side facing. I'm going to do another decrease row. So using the yarn that's here at the edge of my work, I'll just work until I have 3 stitches left on this needle, 3 stitches left on this side of the shoulder. When I get to those 3 stitches, I'll knit 2 together and then knit 1. Drop that yarn, move over to the other side of the shoulder, and here I'm going to knit 1 and then do an SSK decrease. So slip, slip, insert your left hand needle into the front of those 2 slipped stitches and knit them together. So slip, slip, knit together. work to the end of the row. All right, so your challenge now is just to continue working your shoulders using the balls that are attached to each shoulder until your armhole measures whatever length it says for your pattern size. And remember that when you're measuring the armhole, you're measuring from here. So when I measure, I want to measure from this part here up to the top of the armhole. Sometimes you're kind of like measuring in thin air like that, which you can do, or you can kind of eyeball it. So I can see that my armhole starts, my decrease start here. So I'm going to measure right about here. But you're measuring straight from the where you bound off up to the top of your needles over here. All right? All right. I'll see you when the back is done.